Hello, everyone. I'm going to give everyone just a few more seconds to join and then we'll get started. Okay, so it's 1 o'clock in my time zone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I know everybody's time is precious. Welcome to our webinar, Building and Rebuilding a Museum Development Program, Lessons from Abroad. I'm Chris Begley, Senior Vice President at GG&A. And I work with museums here in the United States and internationally to strengthen their fundraising programs. Today, I'm really pleased to be joined by Claire Gilfay, Director of Development at Tate. Claire has spent 20 years in fundraising, working in the cultural sector in France, the US, and the UK. She's originally from Paris, where she graduated from the Sorbonne and gained her initial experience at the Guimet National Museum of Asian Art. Before her present role, Claire was head of philanthropy at the Natural History Museum, London, where she established the philanthropy fundraising team. And prior to natural history, Claire spent 8 years as the first appointed head of collection development at Tate, collaborating with the directors of the collection to create a new fundraising strategy that successfully extended Tate's collection and its global international network of supporters while working on the capital campaign for Tate Modern. Claire began her career in fundraising at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And I've had that enormous pleasure of working with Claire, not only as a client at Tate, but we were colleagues for many years at the Metropolitan Museum. So I'm delighted to welcome her here today, and I'm so grateful for her time, and I'm really excited about our conversation. Before we get started, if anyone has a question for Claire, please feel free to put it in the chat. While we won't have time to answer questions during the webinar, we will follow up with you in the next few days. All right, so let's get started. Claire, I'd like to start by asking you to tell us what attracted you to the position at the Tate.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm delighted to be with you, Chris, who I know very well, and be also able to talk to the group of people who very kindly decided to join us this lunchtime for you, this evening for me in the UK. So to answer your question, I would start by actually saying how Tate is a unique and institution and a landmark, and at the same time we must remember that it's quite a young institution, really, a young museum. Tate Britain, which is the original Tate, of course, was built and opened in 1889, but we have three other galleries: Tate Liverpool, which actually opened in 1988. Tate St. Ives as well, which was in collaboration actually with the government and the artist community in Cornwall, and that was open in the late 60s. And Tate Modern, even though we all talk about Tate Modern, is really only 21 years old. So when we think about it, it is a young institution. And in this very short lifespan, it transformed the visual art world. It continues to do so. And I'd like to maybe highlight one of the articles that some of you might have seen actually over the weekend in the ArtNet, talking about Tate acquiring, Tate becoming, more importantly, the custodian of the work from a Mayan artist. This is exactly who we are. It's an institution that continues to adapt and continues to evolve. And it's an institution that I really strongly believe in. It's intrinsic to the artist community and very genuine to its audiences. And when I took on the role of Director of Development, when I did, which is just over 2 years ago, Tate had gone at the time through many changes, actually. We had just finished a major capital campaign with extension of Tate Modern, so what we know now as the major Tate Modern, a project I worked on when I was originally at Tate. Mario Bolshaw, our current director, had just joined the institution as well, and the board was undergoing many changes with the appointment of the new chair. So these were really exciting times, and fundraising, which had been, may I say, slightly dormant for a few years, which is often the case after a major capital campaign, was really needing to be revived. And these are the challenges which attracted me. Of course, having worked previously at Tate, I understood the culture. I was fully versed, I would say, in Tate's culture, and knew some of my colleagues who I would be working with. And I had respect for their knowledge, the dedication, their professionalism, which is always something so important to consider, and so important for me when I considered actually taking that role. So I suppose to answer really your question, why was I attracted by this role? it was a time when fundraising was about rethinking, recreating, and I had been at the heart of a capital campaign, and I was interested in going back actually at a time when fundraising was to embark in a new direction, all new.
It's fantastic. And it's so important for us all to have that kind of passion for the places we work. So it's great. So lay the stage for us. What was in place at Tate in terms of fundraising when you came back to this new role?
Well, when I came back and I took this role, as I said, we were transitioning from a major capital campaign, and we were ready for we were to start a next stage, but yet to be defined actually. The team, as it was established, was not quite sufficiently structured to implement new goals. And Major Gift was possibly not a strategic objective for Tate at the time. We had absolutely incredible robust systems and processes, but what was missing and what I felt was needed was an ambitious strategy, a new ambitious strategy. Targets and objective had not been reconsidered really in light of what should be the new next phase of fundraising for Tate. And the structure was very much project-led, which didn't encourage to think outside the box or even to focus on the pipeline and our network. So it was I should say it was a very successful team and always has been, but the framework as it stood was restricting growth and limiting expended objectives. And when I started, I also heard, which I know we all do when we come to an institution, but very often I would hear if I question an idea or a project, oh, but we always do it this way. And I think that the team didn't have the time or had not yet taken the time to just take that step back and think of the objectives with a totally different perspective and ask the key questions which are essential, such as, why are we doing that? Is it still relevant? And also critically, what are the desired outcomes? And so at the same time, the leadership at Tate, we call our executive group, was very keen to see changes in the fundraising and to understand how to work actually with the development division and department. But it had not established a new collaborative approach, a new way of working together. And we absolutely needed to be more integrated within the activities, within the institution, or reintegrate ourselves and embed ourselves across the organization. And as we all know, it's about working not just with our curators, working with our marketing, with our communications, with our planning. So while it was very successful, there was still a lot changes needed to be done. Absolutely.
Yeah, but those are such great points, and I think really common challenges that people share. We could probably spend our entire time digging deeper into all of that and how you faced it. But what do you see as some of the critical first steps that you took or programs that you put in place internally or externally that established early success for your fundraising?
So I will just point out that I took the role 2 years ago, which gave me 6 months before the pandemic.
Yeah.
But when I took the role, I would say that my first step was to look to the future and setting goals, realistic but ambitious goals for the individual, but for the division as well. I wanted to get a really good understanding of the team and the strength of each member. So I also reviewed the objectives of the members, of each members, the specifications of each of the roles. I considered how to engage the team and the key stakeholders, the internal key stakeholders, in order to ensure that there was a clear direction which was relevant for us as division, as a fundraising team, but also for the institution as well. And what was also very important was to build the trust and respect of my team. I wanted the team to understand their individual role within the organization, within the fundraising, and to know how their contribution actually would benefit not only the organization, but in turn themselves, which was important to get the best results. But as I said, 6 months after, crisis happened. And so while I started, and I would say to get going, I had sort of a limited time in really achieving what I wanted to do. And in the first 6 months, or in the first months, I should say, what I also focused on was very much our pipeline. And how can we continue to expand the pool? Because I'm sure all of you on this webinar will agree with me. We should never underestimate the pipeline, essential for any fundraising activities or any successful team. I suppose what was also really important was the existing relationship that I had with our curatorial team from my previous time at Tate, and that was also really allowed me to move forward and to ensure actually some immediate success. And working with our curatorial team, working with the different departments, working also with our charity in America, Tate America's Foundation, with my colleagues there, so that actually we worked as an organization as one.
That's terrific. And I think it's often sort of underestimated by some development officers of the importance of those relationships with curators, or depending on what sector you're in, the faculty, artistic directors, performers, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit more, Claire, about were there processes you put in place or communications, or how did you build those relationships with the curatorial team for you and the rest of your team?
As I said, I think I was very lucky that I could build upon the relationship that I had built, that I had already drawn on in the past while working at Tate. And what has worked very well and what we've continued to do is, to a degree, pair a fundraiser with a curator or with a curatorial team. And that has been sort of a match. And therefore, there's a very personal, professional relationship, which is constant. And it's, of course, translated in monthly meetings, but also an immediate open line between actually those teams and my team. I can see how some of those framework actually which exist are very organic, very fluid, because it's communication which is every day, sometime every hour, whether it's a formal meeting or just a question of an email or picking up the phone, or even actually becoming much more accustomed to one another in the past, traveling together or visiting together some collections, or even at Tate events, actually being together, pairing together while meeting some of our supporters or prospects as well. And that has worked very well. That has been a great strength for our team, but also for the organization.
That's great. Thank you. Let's shift a little bit, and I'd like to talk to you about what are some of the major differences you see between fundraising there in the UK and here in the US. So,
well, when I first arrived from New York, actually, because I had worked at the Met, well, goodness me, maybe for 13 years nearly, so quite a while. I definitely had to readjust to the history and the context of philanthropy in Europe and in the UK. And there are indeed rather a few differences, but I suppose the main difference is that museums in the UK are supported by the government. They are actually a governmental funding body. And historically, fundraising has played a lesser role if compared to our American counterparts. Fundraising is so well established, an integral part of any American museums, US museums. And it's only in recent years, although when I say recent years, I would say in the 30 last years, that fundraising in Europe and in UK has gained much more prominence. And the government's support is a strength, absolutely, but also drive rather a difference in the donor's attitude. And often donors have the question, why should they? Why do they feel the need to help a museum which can draw funds from the government? And this is something that we always have to take into account when we do our asking, when we create proposal. We have to a degree, persuade the donor of our need in addition from the funds, above funds that we receive from the government that it provided to us. Then another significant difference, I would say, between UK and US is that the members of a board of UK museums are appointed by the government. So we're a national institution for most of us. And These are government appointment, and the trustees are not expected to be donating or to be donors. While in contrast, the US, most of the members of the boards are appointed because of their commitment to the institution, and often they are lead supporters, lead donors of that institution in particular. I might state something which is quite obvious, and people might feel it's a non-statement, but London is also incredibly cosmopolitan. And I did have a bit of a surprise actually when I moved from New York to London. And it is reflected in our donor base, an incredibly international donor base. And I suppose when we think of the US, which has the most successful economy in the world, maybe US museums did not in the past have to look outside their own US donor base, really, as the UK had to quite immediately. Other factors which we should take in account, which change the difference between US and America and how we operate, is that in the UK, we, for example, operate under the Freedom of Information Act. And you might have seen some cases actually in the press on donors, and more importantly on the provenance of their wealth. And that is more than ever, it is important for us to be transparent in all our fundraising philanthropic process. And we work therefore very closely with an ethics committee, which is an advisory committee, but it helps us navigate through a lot of those ethical questions.
So interesting. Given the government support, can you talk a bit about the role of your communications and messaging to UK audiences about the role of philanthropy and why it's so important to Tate?
So, as I said, Tate is a national museum, but it's also a charity. And until last year, with COVID, I don't think we were so clear. I don't think our role as a charity, but also our role as a museum was as defined. COVID did make us actually rethink on ensuring that our mission is very clear, and a narrative is also as clear to our supporters as to the audiences in the UK. So while we're not a cause-led organization, we do feel as a major institution in the UK in particular that we play a very important social and economical role, and that we are integral to the recovery actually of a pandemic or crisis. And I'm sure you'll all agree that I've always worked in the art world, so for me it's important, but I'm sure you'll all agree that really a society without art is soulless. And this is what we've been very clear on our role, on communicating that to our supporters, to the audience also. We've worked very closely with our communication team, with our membership team, to explain actually our mission, to write the narrative, to be transparent about it, for people to understand the impact. And I would take, I suppose, an example of a change we did last year in terms of and it explained quite well philanthropy. So some of you might know the Turner Prize, which is this really essential, prominent art prize in the UK, which is an annual art prize. And last year, during the COVID year, we rethought and considered that actually it might not have been a time to have such a prize, but instead we decided to create a bursary to be allocated to 10 artists, because it was a response really to a critical moment when the artist community had been so impacted and needed our support. And we felt, after specifically examining again that self-examination of our values, our culture, that actually it was our role, it was important that we could do that, but we could only do it with philanthropy. And then this bursary were actually made possible thanks to some really close supporters of ours and donors. And that's, I think, is a great example to show how philanthropy and Tate can help beyond actually the walls of the gallery, and how we communicated that. And it was incredibly well received. There's been, however, in the UK in particular, quite a growing questioning of philanthropy. And again, you know, we are very aware of the needs for us to be rigorous to ensure that actually there's full alignment of our values and our donor base, and making sure that not just our donors, but our audiences, our visitors, understand actually our values through our donor base, through our philanthropy as well. As an organization, we've got clear commitments, and these are around sustainability, diversity, inclusion, well-being, our own people, our audiences. And again, as fundraisers, we play a role to articulate these commitments, these pledges that we've made within our own proposals, within our own projects and our ask. And I think we've been much better to make a clearer case about the impact of philanthropy. COVID has really helped us in that sense, if I may say help. So it's been such a difficult time for everyone, but it has really played a role in order for us to make it clearer, to make it more impactful.
It's great. It's been so important for institutions, especially museums, to be able to do this. So I'm so happy you've been successful with that work. Can you talk a little bit about how you've worked with the board as well as internally with other staff to help everyone understand the importance of philanthropy in your funding model and their role in the fundraising process, and have those conversations accelerated this year?
Well, yes, they have, and to a degree they haven't. One point that I wanted to highlight is we should never underplay the importance of internal discussion around philanthropy and the perception of philanthropy. And very often internally it revolved around how the figures are presented, how the cost of fundraising are explained, and our return on investment, our ROI, is actually one of the possibly the best within our own organization. But often how the figures are reported don't really account it, don't really explain it, don't really show it. And one way that at Tate we have, which is a little complex, is we fundraise for what we call budget relieving activities, so core activities, and to a degree non-restricted, as well as what we call non-budget relieving activities, which are more restricted activities. And that's an income which is not so clear for the institution. And again, how we talk about it in figures, how we report our return on investment, how we report our income is really important for everyone to understand the strength of philanthropy, but not just a question of figures, but how it helps the organization move forward, progress with any of the project we want to do. Within our team, within my team as well, we have, for example, what we called sub-team advocacy and events, and it is under my umbrella. However, it organizes events which are not just fundraising events, it organizes events for the whole organization. And again, those costs and those expenditures are part of the development. So it's not always very obvious actually how we work, how we interact. So that's a lot of discussions I'm having currently with our finance department, with our marketing, in ensuring that actually we have that perception a little clearer for everyone.
That's great.
And of course, the relationship with the curatorial department, as we discussed before, is so important. And what I feel is key is that we need to be at the beginning of the ideas, so we can bring the donor at the right time and the right journey and maximize on all opportunities. And it's a question of matching, really. So, being part of understanding the curatorial directions, their strategies, their brainstorming, their thinking actually really helps us, but also they benefit and understand how together, how that collaboration can work. If we think of a board, as explained, they don't have so much as a fundraising mandate, but they do play a key role, and more actually that is something which has accelerated during COVID, is how we connect with them and how we work with them, because they have those incredible relationship that we can all benefit from, and they're very aware of that. And so it is about working with our trustees to expand our group of friends and to seize opportunities when these happen. And as you said, importantly, it's ensuring that fundraising remains in people's mind, internally and externally, at all times.
Yeah, embedding it, as you said earlier. That's great. I know you've been working on some initiatives to reach members and donors in new ways. Can you share what's been successful and maybe what hasn't worked so well?
So I sort of feel that we nearly returned to a starting point again, to a degree, and I'll explain that by saying when I started at Tate, actually, the 2008 financial crisis just occurred, and we had literally just launched a capital campaign for Tate Modern with a target of well over 200 million UK pounds to raise, and what I consider the rule book was thrown out, really. So we spent that very first year or so to strengthen our relationship and staying very close to our donors, so that when they felt confident about their wealth and ready to give, we felt we knew we could ask them at that time, and we were very aware of the environment and the sensitivity of how our donor felt at the time, and the current uncertainties are, I would say, very similar. So the lesson learned really is the imperative to maintain actually strong relationship during crisis, which I know a lot of you know as well and do. And during the pandemic, I would say we've made extra effort to strengthen those relationships with our friends, with our donors. And like so many working in museums, we always had that strength and that backdrop of exhibitions and display to showcase our work, to engage, to reach out to donors, and suddenly all that fell apart. We had 3 lockdowns in the UK, a total of period of 11 months. And during that time, we quickly converted all our program to digital. And it was, a period of trial and error. But while we were forced to think of new approaches and how to engage our donors and our audiences differently, this was a great work to have, definitely. And as the pandemic eases, we can evaluate again the success of those new means. One of the digital initiatives that which we put in place and which was incredibly well received and a success was a program of online visits of private collections. And some of our supporters, incredibly generous, offered to open their doors, but virtually, to us, and gave a tour of their collection, whether it was on their phone or something a bit more professional, but and across the globe. We had a visit of a collector in India, we had a visit of a collector in Canada, in Latin America. I mean, or in Europe. It was quite fantastic.
Brilliant.
And these were low cost, but really high value. And the engagement at these events was much higher than we had seen before. Another initiative, which was also very, very well received, was how we thanked our supporters of exhibitions. And in the past, we would have invited them, of course, to come immediately to see the exhibition as we just opened. Suddenly, this could not happen. A lot of them were not able to travel. So we switched and we created a special digital experience with the artist talking, with a curator talking, with showing the work. And again, on a very tight budget, but really appreciated by our supporters. So, we embraced, in the age of social media, and social distancing, but social media, there's also that expectation of much more communication from any organization that people are interacting.
Yeah.
And how do we do a communication which is more personal, which also engage and update and keep people aware of what's happening? And what we're going to do now, and what we started to do, is really ask ourselves, to which extent digital should be part of all our offers, really.
Yeah, and I know everybody is really grappling with that right now. We have 2 minutes left, so I'm gonna ask one more question. We might go over time a little bit, so for those of you who can't stay on, I want to thank you in advance for joining us, and I hope everyone can stay for this one last question for Claire. So like US museums, as we just talked about, UK museums have really suffered over the last year, and Tate is no exception. You talked about some of the great initiatives, such great ideas that you all implemented, but you also had to restructure the development department recently, I know, as a result of budget cuts. Did this moment give you an opportunity to think a bit differently about how you were organized and what activity you prioritized?
Absolutely. And, unfortunately, like all, we were significantly impacted by the pandemic. And what we did at Tate is we proposed what we called a voluntary redundancy scheme exit, And that was in agreement with our union, but it meant that we considered with a very open mind all requests at all levels and for all roles. So what happened is we lost actual roles, not just people. And it is working with the unions that we could restructure. And of course, I would have liked to have done a restructure in much happier circumstances, but there was an opportunity for us there to think different, or to think differently. And while going through a restructure, of course, it's always important as a manager to define the short-term goals and the long-term goals, and to allocate the budget to optimize all those goals. But I guess during the pandemic, the short-term goals maybe took more significant in the normal because of the severity of the impact. But what I looked at is how do we capitalize actually on our assets and our regular giving, our regular income, which is our bedrock. And that was about our patrons, our international council, all our regular giving groups. How do we also ensure that our corporate partners who've been with us for a number of years remain with us? How do we talk to them about renewal at the time of really difficulties? And with that in mind, actually, that these were looking at the team and looking at those forces, but also looking at the future, as I mentioned earlier, what is major gifts, and thinking in a new structure. How do we ensure that actually we can have major gifts, we can have those leadership ask, and importantly as well, legacy, that not many people like to talk about, but legacy is so important. So what is a legacy plan? What should be a legacy plan for Tate? So out of this restructure, some positive came out, definitely, in looking at those new opportunities, a new way of what fundraising should be for Tate. And also it has been an opportunity to attract new talents and new experts from different lived experiences as well, and bring to the group a new energy. So sadly, a restructure which had been forced, but a restructure which can help us in the future as well.
Yeah. It's great that you can see the silver lining in all of this. Claire, thank you so much. This, I think, was so helpful for our audiences. Thank you for sharing such great information and for your time. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. I know we're over by a minute or two. Thanks for sticking with us. And we hope we see you again at our next webinar. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Claire.